Welcome, my name is Tommy Smith with RandHSports. Today is Monday, August the 29th, and we are coming to you from the Press Box Grill in downtown Dallas. The Press Box Grill, where they cover all the bases, beer, food, and sports. Tonight we're here to launch our inaugural Big 12 Conference Football Show, and alongside of me to do that is Matthew Postins. Matthew is a contributor to RandHSports. You'll find his work on the Big 12 Conference. You can also find Matthew, he is the editor of College Football America, which we'll talk about a little later. And you can also find his work doing some work with the Dallas Cowboys on CowboysHQ.com, as well as the Dallas Mavericks on DallasBasketball.com. Matthew, welcome. How you doing?
I'm fine, Tommy. Glad I was able to find a little sliver of time to help you out with this evening.
No one busier than Matthew Postins in this business that I know. Well, thanks for giving us that time. Really appreciate it. Really excited. It's been a long off season. Time has come for the real deal to start this weekend. We got a little taste of college football last week, but this weekend, Friday night, things get cranked up in the Big 12 Conference. Oklahoma Sooners are the preseason pick again to win the conference. They've got a big game coming up, maybe the biggest game in the conference, coming up against Houston on Saturday. And Texas and Notre Dame we'll get to on Sunday. But Big 12 Conference made a lot of news off the field during the summer at Big 12 Media Days when they went ahead and approved moving forward with expansion. And Matthew had written a piece for RandHSports about that time, about expansion. And as we've moved forward along the timeline, any of your thoughts changed on expansion and what it might look like in the conference?
Well, no, my thoughts really haven't changed. It's just that it seems like everybody who isn't in the group or in the Power 5 conferences seems to want a piece of the Big 12 right now. I think they said at one point they had anywhere from 17 to 20 different teams, express some interest in joining the conference. From my standpoint, I still think they're only going to expand by 2 teams, and those 2 teams, probably some combination of BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, or Memphis. All of those teams have pros and cons. I think, to me, I think BYU's a lock, personally. I think they have enough of a national profile, and they're enough of a good fit for the conference that they would be beneficial to bringing them in. I think Houston, given the way they played last year, I think they'd be a good selection. I think there are some out-of-state Big 12 coaches that are worried about the recruiting footprint that they've built in the Houston area, and whether or not bringing in Houston would be serious competition to them, which, given the way the Cougars are playing right now, they could be. Memphis, of course, is coming off a good season. FedEx has kind of made it clear that if Memphis were to join the conference, they might be interested in sponsoring a Big 12 championship game. And Cincinnati is a team that's been long rumored as a potential Big 12 expansion candidate, mainly because they would make a very good traveling partner for West Virginia. Which, they're out there really isolated in the Big 12 right now. They travel over 1,000 miles for just about every road trip in football and basketball, and giving them a travel partner like Cincinnati in non-Olympic sports would be something they would be very interested in.
And as we move forward, I guess the Big 12 had mentioned maybe November as a timeline of when we might know a little bit more about who these teams and paring down who these teams might be. Do you have a feel as far as the timeline when that might happen? Does that sound about right?
It sounds about right, but I think the big question is whether or not any of their choices would be available to join the conference in 2017. There's no hurry, of course. They can have a conference championship game in 2017 regardless of whether they have 10 or 12 members. But the big question is most of these teams have some sort of a waiting period where they have to inform their conference before they can join a new one. In some cases, it's 21 months. So will the Big 12 help try to extricate them from that so they can join the league in 2017? Or will they wait until 2018 when they go through their whole waiting period? So I think that's the biggest question, aside from who they're going to pick, is how quickly they'll be able to join the conference.
And the other big news, obviously, off the field this offseason was the Baylor Bears. And we've all talked about that. But they do open play Friday night. They will be at home Friday night to open the season and finally get to play some football under Jim Grove. Give me an idea of what you feel is going on down in Waco as they approach this weekend.
Well, I think they're finally just glad to be able to focus on football a little bit in terms of actually playing the game, because you're right, it's been an extremely long offseason for them, losing our players, losing a lot of credibility that they've built up over the past few years in terms of not just the way they played football, but the perception of what they were as a university, as a university that was interested in doing the right things when it came to their athletic programs. And to see a school like that cut corners the way they've cut them over the past few years, and that's being charitable, frankly, it's pretty disheartening for anybody who follows college football. They're going to beat Northwestern State like a drum on Friday night, simply because they're raring to go. They want to play somebody. Northwestern State is an average FCS team. Seth Russell might play a half, maybe 2/3 of that game before the 2s and the 3s come in. In fact, Baylor will probably have a very good non-conference schedule in terms of wins and losses, because it's not a very difficult 3 games before they get into Big 12 play. I think that's where they have their issues, because they're working in some new players. Katie Cannon is banged up. They've got players that were in their pipeline that decided to leave the school. Those were recruits that were going to join the team this year that have gone to other schools like A&M in Texas. And, I think over the course of the season, I think just the weight of everything is going to make it tougher for them to focus, because this is something that, even though the season's going to begin and they're going to play football games, they're going to have to deal with it every week, because they're going to get a fresh set of reporters from a different team every week that's going to be asking them questions about whether the scandals have been distracting to them, and even if they're not, they're going to have to hear about it all season. And I think as things go on this year, I think Baylor's going to have more and more trouble staying competitive in the Big 12.
And you and I will have an opportunity to be down there in Waco on Friday night. What's the thing you say? And I agree with you. I think this is going to be a pretty lopsided game in Baylor's favor. But what's the one thing you might be looking for from the program, from the team, on the sidelines, in the locker room when we're down there Friday?
I think it's just their demeanor. I mean, I think they'll obviously be excited to play. I think the thing that I'm going to look for is just how focused they are on the task at hand. They'll be able to see things in the way they execute, whether they're converting on third downs, whether they're possessing the ball well and avoiding turnovers. Body language is, I think, a big thing you look at on Friday night.
The other game Friday night, Kansas State will kick off what may or may not be the great Bill Snyder's last season in Manhattan, but they'll be taking on the 8th-ranked Stanford Cardinal. And anytime you're talking about Stanford, you have to talk about Christian McCaffrey. So what do you think about Kansas State's chances, in Palo Alto on Friday night?
I think it's going to be tough. I mean, Stanford's trying to break in a new quarterback, but when you have Christian McCaffrey, you can just hand him the football 35 times. And against a Kansas State defense that wasn't particularly good last year and hasn't really upgraded, in my opinion, enough from a talent standpoint, I think it could easily be a game that could get away from the Wildcats very quick. And it's one of 3 games here this weekend in which the Big 12 is playing top 15 opponents. That's just one of 3. And 3 very good games at that, but I think that's a game that could get away from Kansas State very quickly.
And you bring up a good point as far as playing those top-ranked teams. The big one on Saturday, maybe the biggest game in the conference this weekend. Certainly a big game out of the chute, with all kinds of implications. When this game was originally scheduled, a big game, but with everything that's happened with expansion, the game between Oklahoma and Houston, down in Houston, becomes a much larger affair Saturday, and kind of a tricky game for Oklahoma for a lot of reasons. I think Greg Gord Jr., quarterback for Houston, and Baker Mayfield would be the story there. What do you think when you look at Oklahoma and Houston?
Well, coaches like to have a stretch game before they get into conference play, and they call it a stretch game because they want to stretch their team a little bit. They want to see what they're made of before they get into conference play. This was not supposed to be a stretch game when they scheduled it a few years ago. This was supposed to be kind of a happy meal game where they get their win and they're happy about it. Houston's a much better team than they were a few years ago. Greg Ward, you hit the nail right on the head. He's one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the country. To me, he's a dark horse Heisman candidate. He's got a lot of really good weapons around him that could make things very difficult for Oklahoma. Still, Oklahoma is one of the best teams in the country. They've got some of the best talent coming back on offense. Baker Mayfield, I think, is primed to have a big year. getting his year of eligibility back in the summer that I actually don't think he's going to need because I think he'll go to the NFL after this season. You have Ryan and Nixon running the football. You have a talented defense that has some holes, but Oklahoma always seems to find guys that can fill those holes in terms of the players they've lost on defense. And of course, I think the one thing you have to worry about, and I don't think you have to worry about that with this game, and we'll see, is this was not supposed to be the big game on their schedule. It's supposed to be the one a few weeks from now against Ohio State in Norman. The one thing you don't want to do if you're Oklahoma is get caught looking ahead to the Buckeyes in a few weeks, because if you do, Houston is more than talented enough to make them pay for it and make Oklahoma 0-1 to start the season. I'm still taking Oklahoma, even though it's a neutral site game and it's in Houston. But I think it's going to be a lot closer than some of those probably think.
Another big game on Saturday is going to be the Oklahoma State and Southeastern Louisiana matchup. Oklahoma State coming off another big year under Mike Gundy. Mason Rudolph is healthy. Looks like he's going to be okay at quarterback this year. But you have a pick as far as receivers in the Big 12, and James Washington, that you think is going to have a big season. Tell us why that is.
Well, first of all, he's the leading returning receiver in the conference in terms of statistics. So right there you have the most experienced receiver in the conference. He's probably the best vertical threat in the conference. He's the guy that can really get down the field, get past the secondary, get a step on a guy. He has great hands. Mason Rudolph throws a nice deep ball, and he's not going to drop very many passes. So you put those two factors into combination. He could lead the conference in yardage. He could lead the conference in yards after catch. He could lead the conference in touchdowns. I think somebody will end up leading the conference in receptions besides him. Maybe somebody from Baylor or TCU. But he's the guy that is a home run threat every time you line up, every time you throw him the football. He can take it to the house. And he's a big reason why Oklahoma State's going to be in contention in this conference this year. He's a big reason why they're going to easily beat Southeastern Louisiana on Saturday afternoon. That's a pure happy meal game. That's a game against an FCS opponent that should really pose absolutely no issue to Oklahoma State.
And maybe another one of those games will happen right in our own backyard in Fort Worth when TCU plays host to South Dakota State. Just recently, TCU has gone ahead and named Kenny Hill their starting quarterback. At their kickoff luncheon, Coach Patterson made it known that they feel, 8 to 9 games out, it was important to have a starter. They've let Kenny Hill know he is going to start. One of the things I found interesting from Coach Cumbie and Coach Meacham at TCU, as well as Coach Patterson, is in making that decision between Foster Sawyer and Kenny Hill. They were looking for not maybe the most talented player, but also the player that makes those around him better. And what about Kenny Hill? What we saw at Texas A&M, and maybe a little bit of that got to his head, and he'll say that himself. But what about Kenny Hill do you think makes others around him better?
Well, I think we're going to find out, because he burst onto the scene at A&M 2 years ago, and I'm not sure we really understood what kind of quarterback he was, and I'm not really sure A&M understood what they had. Because of his ability to get the ball down the field, to run out of the backfield and create things. And I like what Gary Patterson said about finding a quarterback that makes the other players around him better. You have to have that out of your quarterback. It can't just be a guy who's going to handle everything himself, who's going to run the ball out of the backfield, who's going to throw short passes and things like that. You've got to have a guy who understands the offense, who understands how to use the different tools around him and make them successful. And he's got some good ones. Devontae Turpin could be the breakout player in this conference this year from an offensive standpoint. He only got a taste of it last year. This guy can receive, he can rush, he can return. He's a Christian McCaffrey type who hasn't come into his own yet. So I'm really interested to see how Kenny Hill and Devontae Turpin come together as a receiver-quarterback combination. But I'm not really surprised Kenny Hill got the job. He's the more experienced of the two. He's been sitting there for a year, so he understands the offense as well as Foster Sawyer does. And he's got the better arm. He's got the better escapability. And I think I see him getting TCU off to a good start Saturday. South Dakota State's a good team. They're ranked in the top 25 in FCS. They've got a really good wide receiver in Jake Weineke. But TCU should win this game pretty easily.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned the stretch game when you talked about Oklahoma. Coach Patterson talked about having a winnable game in your non-conference schedule, a stretch game, and a 50-50 game. And I think when you talked about Oklahoma and looking forward to Ohio State, maybe that stretch game for them, for TCU, is going to be when they host Arkansas in week 2. Any chance of TCU, like you said, South Dakota State's not anything to sneeze at. Any chance that TCU might be looking ahead to Arkansas?
Maybe, but even if they do, I don't see South Dakota State beating. I mean, South Dakota State's a good team, don't get me wrong, but TCU's a better program, they have better talent, they're at home. It'd be nearly impossible to get for South Dakota State to win that game.
And moving on, game out in Lubbock, Stephen F. Austin, which is a team that I think you have a rooting interest in.
Maybe.
Will be taking on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and the answer or the question in Lubbock is always who's going to play defense. Pat Mahomes, a great quarterback, but again, doesn't play defense. So, what do you see out of the Red Raiders this season, and Mahomes' maturity, more or less? What are they going to do on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, I think statistically, Pat Mahomes could have the best season of any quarterback in the league. I mean, he has the arm, he has the ability to get out of the pocket, he has good weapons around him, even though he lost 2 really good ones in Washington and Grant last year. There's still plenty of experience around him on the offensive side of the football. They've got a good offensive line. They're going to score a lot of points. In fact, I guarantee you they're going to score points. Both teams are going to score points on Saturday because Stephen F's defense probably will not be able to match up with Texas Tech, sadly. And Texas Tech's defense is going to have a hard time with Stephen F because Stephen F plays a similar system to Texas Tech. They have good talent. They've got a great wide receiver, Robert Sylvester, an experienced quarterback in Clint Conk, and they're going to be able to do some things against this defense. TCU's defense, or Texas Tech's defense rather, is still quite a bit away, in my opinion, from being a top-flight Big 12 defense. And that's why I see Texas Tech winning, but they're going to have to score a lot of points to do it because Stephen F has the ability to score 20, 30 points in a game like this.
Other games on Saturday, note Missouri, West Virginia. Kind of David Holgerson's really trying to get things going there at West Virginia in the Big 12 Conference. And media days, more than anything this year, he felt like they were on their way to doing that. Where do you see West Virginia this year in the conference, and what do you see as they face SEC school in Missouri this weekend?
Well, it's the first SEC team they've played since 2011, and I think it's the first SEC team they've opened with at home in 34 years. So this is actually a significant game for West Virginia. Even though Missouri wasn't that good last year, they were 5-7, and they have a new coach, Barry Odom. This is a significant game for West Virginia because they want to get off on the right foot. Last year was very much a happy meal non-conference slate for them. They didn't play a lot of tough teams. I mean, they worked Maryland in there, but Maryland was 4-8 last year, so I wouldn't call them a tough team after West Virginia wins 8 games in 2015. So this is an interesting matchup because they have the quarterback that's been there. He's experienced now. He understands the system. They've got to figure out a way to replace Wendell Smallwood, who's now in the NFL. They lost some pieces on defense. So what West Virginia is really looking for on Saturdays, they're looking for some guys to step up, to make significant contributions at defensive end, at running back, and a couple of other key positions where they have some experience. And if they can do that and they can win that game, that's going to be a nice building block for them as they go into the rest of non-conference.
And 2 other games on Saturday, Rhode Island and Kansas, but I want to talk a little bit about Iowa State. Matt Campbell, his first year there with the Cyclones. They're hosting Northern Iowa, which again, not a bad team. I really like Matt Campbell and like what he's had to say since coming to Iowa State. But how tough is it going to be for the Cyclones this season with a new head coach? And what do you see them doing on Saturday against Northern Iowa?
Well, it will be a tough season, but he has some pieces to work with. Most notably, the running back Mike Warren, who was the freshman of the year in the Big 12 last year. They've got experience at quarterback. They've got experience at wide receiver. Their defense is kind of a work in progress right now. They lost some good talent last year at graduation, so they're going to have to find some guys defensively that can do some things for them. Last year they got off on the wrong foot and ended up 2-10, and Paul Rhodes ended up losing his job. Matt Campbell was the youngest coach in FCS when he was hired to take over Toledo. Everybody raves about this guy's ability to recruit. to connect with athletes, to coach. He's an offensive-sided coach kind of guy. He went to Mount Union University, which is the best D3 program in the country. He's pretty much spent his entire coaching career in the state of Ohio. And he said he was lured to Iowa State by their facilities, their football stadium, their football facilities for practices and things like that. He really liked the vibe in Ames when he took his Toledo Rockets there 2 years ago for a road game, and that was a big reason why he decided to go to Iowa State. So it's not going to be this year because they're not there talent-wise. But I think they'll win more games than they won last year, and I think Matt Campbell's going to start building a foundation there in Iowa State that maybe in 2 or 3 years can make them competitive in the Big 12.
That wraps up the Saturday games, and the next one we have to talk about, one of the most intriguing games on the schedule again for an early season game, Notre Dame going to Austin to face the Texas Longhorns. And as unfair as it might be to say, this really is the third year for Charlie Strong, and this is a coach who knows that he is coaching for his job. He has yet to name a starter at quarterback, either Shane Buechele or Tyrone Swoops, excuse me. He's got it narrowed down to those two, but says he will not name a starter until they walk on the field on Sunday. And Notre Dame, of course, is going to go with two quarterbacks as well. Texas lost to Notre Dame 38-3 last year. I think it really set the tone early for their season. They kind of turned around a little bit at the end of the year. Is this a measuring stick game for Texas? See where they're at going forward, and can the Longhorns and will the Longhorns step up and save Charlie Strong's job in 2016?
I hate to say it's a measuring stick game because it's the first game of the year, but it's really kind of hard to escape because I think a lot of people are going to look at it that way. And you're right, it's not fair to Charlie Strong. I've always said a college football coach needs 4 years to establish his program, go through a full recruiting cycle, and see what he's really able to do with the program. It's not fair, but those are the expectations at Texas right now for Charlie Strong. His job, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of other people, is very much on the line. So this is a measuring stick game, and the choice at quarterback is extremely important for him because he said that whoever he chooses is going to be the guy.
Right.
In other words, he's not going to toggle back and forth like Notre Dame at least is going to in the first game. He's going to pick a guy, and he's going to stick with him. And that's why ultimately I think he's going to pick Shane Buechele for the game on Sunday, the true freshman, even though it's probably not totally fair to him to ask him to start against Notre Dame in his first college football game as a true freshman. But Tyrone Swoops has had opportunities to make this team better offensively. He's under 500 as a starter. He's been given opportunities. He has not stepped up and made it happen. And Shane Buechele, as untested as he is, has played well in practice. He played well in the spring game. He enrolled in Texas early because he wanted this opportunity. And I think ultimately Charlie Strong, thinking and hoping, fingers crossed, that this guy is his Teddy Bridgewater.
Right.
This is the guy who's going to make his program take the next jump up like they did at Louisville. He's going to cast his lot with Buechele on Sunday.
And a lot of work needed to be done with that Texas defense. They did have another good recruiting class. A lot of people call Texas, it could be the most improved team in the country. What do you see that's happened to that defense that is going to be an improvement over last year?
Well, they've got tons of young guys who played last year and made a difference last year, and they're all back and they're all healthy. He doesn't have a whole lot of injuries that he's dealing with right now from a defensive standpoint. I think potentially is one of the best defensive players in the country, regardless of position. I mean, he's that good. They took their lumps last year because of injuries. They had to play a lot of young guys, not just the defensive side, but on the offensive side too. You're pointing it to Patrick Vahe, the offensive lineman, who started last year. I think I believe he was a true freshman last year. They have so many young guys under 2 deep that have played last year. That should pay off for them this year, much like TCU last year. They had to play a ton of young guys on the defensive side of the football because of injuries. That will pay off for TCU this year in terms of experience and ability to execute and ability to play the kind of defense Gary Patterson wants to. I think that gives Texas something to build on. Now, whether they take that next step is really entirely up to how the team plays as a whole. But most notably, can they establish the run with Chris Warren and company, and thereby make the job of the quarterback a little bit easier? And can they get a little more efficient on defense, especially in the first half of games? because they were not as good in the first half as they were in the second half of games last year. And if they can improve that efficiency a little bit in the first half, that's going to put them in a position where they can not only win 6 games to get to a bowl game, but maybe win 7 or 8 games this year and nudge them to a point where Charlie Strong could feel a little bit more comfort in his job security. Because recruiting hasn't been the problem. He's got 2 top 10 classes to go around the last 2 years. The problem is time. Texas fans are getting antsy. They remember they tried to recruit Nick Saban away from Alabama. Good luck with that. So time is not on Charlie Strong's side right now, but a good season should change that.
Okay, well, that pretty much wraps up, week 1. Let's take a look at the season as a whole. What are maybe 2 or 3 storylines that you're really looking at, from the Big 12 this season, expansion, Oklahoma, Charlie Strong. What are maybe the 3 biggest storylines that you're going to be looking for in the conference?
Well, expansion is a big deal, not just because they're talking about adding teams, but what that means to the conference and what that means to the TV contracts as well. So let's just say the Big 12 decides to add 2 teams. Let's just say they decide to add Houston and BYU. Well, for BYU and Houston, that's obviously a huge deal because the Big 12 paid out about $30 million a team last year in terms of TV revenue, shared revenue, and things like that. That's a huge step up for Houston. It's a huge step up for BYU in terms of revenue. But there's also a TV component to this that ESPN and Fox are watching very closely. If the Big 12 adds 2 teams, then ESPN is obligated per their contract to provide $50 million to the Big 12 per team every year of the remaining years of the TV contract. So 2 teams could be an extra $600–800 million to the conference over the next 6 to 8 years. That's why it's such a big deal to think about adding these teams now, because there's a financial component to that. Now, I feel like ESPN is going to ask them to restructure, and I think the Big 12 will do that because they want to be a good partner. But that's something that ESPN's watching very closely because that would really change the marketplace. The Big 12 has, I think, the longest term left on any TV contract right now. Some of the other conferences are coming up for renegotiations in the next few years. So seeing that contract inflate that way would impact their negotiations with other conferences in terms of their TV contracts in a way that I'm not sure ESPN wants at this point.
It's been good. Enjoy it. I want to talk one last thing. Give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about your other project with College Football America. The 2016 College Football Encyclopedia is out and available. It's available on iBooks this year. You want to tell our watchers a little bit about the project, what you guys do, and how unique of a product this is.
Well, College Football America is the yearbook that myself, Kendall Webb, and Chuck Cox created about 5 years ago, and it's designed to be a Bible for college football. We have every team in college football in the book, not just the Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners, but Southwestern Assemblies of God University down in Waxahachie, Texas, and St. Thomas University in Minnesota, which actually Chuck Cox is going to a game up there this weekend. And we have every team in college football in the book. We try to go to college football games around the country and try to write about and talk about the experience of being at college football games. Not so much who won and who lost, but really kind of convey what the experience is like at these different places. So, our Kendall Webb was at the quadruple header over at Frisco, over at the Star on Saturday. He took a flight the next day and did some Canadian college football games on Sunday. He's going to do a trip to the Northeast, go to Syracuse, Boston College, a couple of other places. Chuck Cox is going to St. Thomas in Minnesota this weekend, mainly because he's going to a couple of shows. I believe it's called First Avenue in Minneapolis, where the Revolution Prince's Band is playing a couple of shows this weekend. And then I'm going with you to Baylor on Friday, and then I'm going to the Alabama-USC game on Saturday, and then maybe Texas-Notre Dame on Sunday. I'm still waiting to hear if we got a pass for that. If I don't get that game, I'll go to Prairie View in Texas Southern because Prairie View is opening up a new stadium, and those are things that we're always kind of interested in. We try not to play favorites in terms of the teams that we cover. I mean, obviously I went to Stephen F., but I only go to one Stephen F. game a year, so I try to make it a good one. And otherwise, I'm traveling around the country. I'm going to be doing a lot of Pac-12 this year. Cal, Stanford, Arizona State. I'll get over to San Diego State too. So it's just a great way for us to get around the country, see college football games, and bring that experience to fans that maybe can't get there.
You can follow Matthew on his travels at Poston's Postcard on Twitter, at Road Trip Sports on Twitter. Want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Want to thank Pressbox Grill.